Space syntax is the answer, but what is the question? Hello, I'm delighted and honoured to have been invited to give this plenary report. And in doing so, I wish to reflect on the themes of the 7th China Space Syntax Conference, to offer some thoughts about the drivers that influence the development of the space syntax approach, and to present some of the many recent technological and methodological innovations that we've been working on in London and applying in practice throughout the world. But first, let me pay my respects to everyone attending this event, to Dean Li and Vice Dean Zhao of the School of Architecture at Jilin Jiangsu University. Thank you for being our kind hosts. To academician Jin Duan, the most prominent pioneer of space syntax in China. And to Director Liu Yansong of the Changchun Planning and Preparation Research Center. Of course, to Mr. Liu Ning, one of my oldest and best friends in China, and Space Syntax Limited's chief representative. On the subject of friends, let me say hello to some more old friends, to Wang Haofeng, Dai Jiaoling, Shang Sheng, Alain Kieradia, and Yang Tao. And lastly, to many friends in Changchun, to Liu Lai, Li Bingqin, and so many other dear people, fellow Northeasterners. It's 50 years since Bill Hillier began his theoretical journey. In 1972, he wrote a paper titled Architecture and Design, along with John Musgrove at UCL and Pat O'Sullivan at the University of Wales. Here began the long journey that evolved the space syntax approach. The paper is worth reading again. It presents a proposition that the architectural research process should be fundamentally integrated with the architectural design process, not separate from it. And that by doing so, architectural design can properly embrace architectural research, moving from a relationship of analysis, synthesis, to that of conjecture test, from architects just picking up research and trying to apply it, to doing it themselves, for researchers to be directly involved in the design process, from architectural determinism to architecturally generative possible futures. Within a year, Hillier was writing about the use of algorithms to enable generative codes for design. That was 1973. And so to deeply understand space syntax, I encourage each of you to read these early papers. However, in my talk today, I'd like to discuss the future, perhaps to consider the next 50 years of space syntax. The 7th China Space Syntax Conference has 5 main themes, which are ecological wisdom and science-based methods, rural revitalization and regional planning, urban culture and heritage protection, software development and algorithm updates, and applications and promotion in advanced education. These themes are excellent, and I wish to refer to each of them in my remarks. In fact, I've been tempted to think of them like 5 principal streets in a city, thematic boulevards, if you like. How do these boulevards connect together to create a vibrant network? Because after all, a network is stronger than any individual street. What happens at their intersections, and what are the conversations taking place in each of these thematic boulevards? I'd like to offer some suggestions. I'd like to describe 8 drivers and 8 behaviours that are influencing the development of my own practice with my colleagues at Space Syntax Limited. And the first of these is the importance of practice. As we can see in the 1972 paper, space syntax was created to help practicing architects. And so I encourage all space syntax researchers to consider how their work helps practitioners. there's sometimes a temptation in academic research to pursue research for the sake of research, for the sake of the next paper. Bill Hillier was often heard asking, but what is the question? So embrace practice, because practice generates the questions that drive research. Practice provokes innovations that research can embrace. My second theme is the importance of the social. At the heart of the space syntax approach is human behavior, not space. The description and analysis of space is, of course, fundamental in space syntax, but people matter more. By all means, undertake the spatial analysis, but remember why we're doing it. Embrace people. My third recommendation is about the importance of the physical. Again, there's a tendency in space syntax research often to focus too heavily on spatial analysis at the expense of other interests. And of course, it's because space syntax researchers have provided unique methods for describing and analysing space to make the invisible visible that it's natural to give such important attention to space. But space only exists because it's contained by physical surfaces, and space is only important because it contains human and non-human behaviours. Le Corbusier said, "Architecture is the masterly, correct and magnificent play of forms brought together in light." Now, we, the space syntax community, might wish to substitute space for form, but I would suggest, rather than substitute, we should add. Remember the form while analysing the space. Julian Hansen, who co-authored The Social Logic of Space with Bill Hillier, had a particular interest in the placement of objects in space. Space only has true meaning in reference to the physical surfaces that shape it and the objects that exist within it. And let's also remember these surfaces, these objects have colour, have texture, create an acoustic. I therefore encourage everyone to be full spectrum, to think about the spatial, but to consider the physical that generates the spatial. Embrace the physical. The fourth driver of practice is the importance of non-human behaviours, and this is a driver that is increasingly important in our own practice at Space Syntax Limited. Humans occupy space alongside many other species, and the climate emergency is highlighting the depletion of the natural environment, the reduction in biodiversity, and the importance of environmental restoration. There's, I think, an interesting line of research into these non-human species. Linescapes exist in the natural environment that track the migratory patterns of non-human species. The fact that human and non-human species refer to the line seems to me worthy of further exploration. We need to learn to live alongside, to nurture, to support non-human species, and so I encourage you to embrace the non-human in your research. My fifth recommendation is around the importance of curiosity and experimentation. As many of you will know, space syntax has many correlations, often delivered in the form of scattergrams, with linear regressions often being sought between spatial hierarchy and mobility, between spatial measures and land values, or carbon emissions, or many different kinds of performance measures. And quite reasonably, we go looking for the highest R-squared value. the highest fit between the spatial measure and the performance measure. But in doing so, don't just follow the trend. Don't just try to eke out the highest R² without properly seeking out those anomalies that don't fall on the regression line. Those anomalies have two really important characteristics. First, they help identify mistakes in the methodology. The anomaly is sometimes a mapping error, sometimes a data collection error. And by trawling through the anomalies, you can improve, fix, correct your modelling and methodology. And then you're left with a set of further anomalies, which are often those parts of the system that don't perform according to the theory. They're the things we should be really interested in, because they're the phenomena that drive the theory. Why can't we explain what's happening in that particular street, that particular location? Perhaps it was a one-off event, or it might be a phenomenon that is influencing human behaviour that isn't yet explained by the spatial analysis that's being undertaken. So my fifth recommendation is to seek out the anomaly and to embrace curiosity in the research process. The sixth driver of research, I believe, should be the importance of shade and ventilation, the importance of the natural environment in the development of architectural, urban design and urban planning practice. Climate change is creating conditions that make it increasingly onerous for people to be outside. We are in a COVID situation where we're recognizing the importance of ventilation. Yet, for too long, the design of our built environments have sealed up buildings and made them less naturally ventilated. They've denuded the space between buildings and given it over to vehicles. There's too little ventilation and too little shade. What we're finding in practice across the world, but especially in the Middle East, is the need to deeply shade the built environment, and in doing so, to catch the breeze, to ventilate streets and public spaces. All of which is about creating conditions that make it more likely that people will wish to walk and not to drive, to be outside and not inside. These drivers are going to continue as we address climate change, and I encourage the space syntax research community to embrace the importance of shade and ventilation in our research. My seventh and penultimate driver is the importance of Changchun. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to many friends and colleagues in this great city. They know my personal affinity for northeast industrial cities, not only for the muscular strength of their economic productivity, but also for the warmth and sophistication of their human cultures. The film industry, the crafts, painting and artistic expression of the city, and perhaps above all, the food. I'd like to pay tribute and acknowledge the importance of Changchun to the development of space syntax and to the dissemination of theoretical and methodological ideas across the northeast of China. And finally, when considering the future of space syntax, I'd like to acknowledge the importance of China. Space syntax originated at the Bartlett University College London in the 1970s and developed there in the 1980s. But its development timeline shares in much of its part the timeline of the development of the new China. And more intimately, it's worth noting how some of the earliest groundbreaking research was undertaken by Chinese scholars. Zhu Jianming undertook work in housing developments in central London that had never been done before, understanding the patterns of behaviour of residents, of visitors, of men and women and children that provoked new theoretical developments and understandings of social cultures and spatial cultures, and was fundamental to a great body of later work in the space syntax canon. China has been a place in which space syntax teaching, research and practice has flourished in the last 20 years and will continue to do so. And I look forward to continuing to be a part of that and in small part contributing to it. I'd like to turn now to recent innovations in technology and methodology that have taken place across the last 3 years, and partly driven by COVID, partly driven by practice. These innovations are increasing our ability to apply those drivers that I've just been talking about. The first area of innovation is in 3D. We've added a cost and a weight to the angularity in the Z dimension in our spatial models, following a trend and a desire that's been there for many years, that has had one-off experiments and is now systematically delivered within the graph engine. The second key innovation is in the graph engine itself. We've completely rewritten the space syntax graph engine that drove DepthMap. We have created the Sage graph engine, and this Sage graph engine has many important features which improve on the incredible graph engine at the heart of DepthMap. Sage allows us, for example, to undertake faster and more complete analysis of the spatial network in comparison to DepthMap, which found ways of approximating certain spatial measures. Sage does everything faster. And what Sage also allows us to do is one-way and no right, no left turning movements to be coded in to the spatial model. So if you like, it brings a degree of sophistication to what was previously the approximation or adaptation of earlier spatial models. A third huge area of research and development is around integrated urban modelling. We've now completed an integrated urban model of Great Britain, the countries of Scotland, Wales and England. And this model connects together dynamically the complete spatial network, including walking and driving networks. And it connects these directly to the land use layer of individual plot-based land uses and land use capacities of every building, connecting those to the transport network, transport timetable, so that we can run analysis of journey times, mode choice. We can compare the reach from any location to, for example, local services, local shops, to jobs and employment opportunities, and compare the degree to which you can reach more places by public transport versus private transport, and point out those areas which are more car dependent and those problems that often occur in urban settings when people are over reliant on cars and can't afford to drive. A fourth huge innovation building on the integrated urban model is the creation of a Walkability Index for Great Britain. This Walkability Index is resonating with the developers of new towns, housing developers, and it's holding them to account to make sure that alongside the delivery of new housing, we're also delivering local jobs and local services, health services, education services, that can allow people to walk to those destinations and not rely on the car. Of course, this is hugely important in terms of addressing the emergency of climate change and reducing the carbon footprint. The Walkability Index was developed in participation with the Prince's Foundation, with Knight Frank and with Smart Growth Associates. The fifth area of technology development is a platform we call the Zero Navigator. It builds on the carbon concerns of the Walkability Index, and it connects mobility patterns to carbon emission patterns. It's been designed for local authority planning officers in order to better understand the implications of planning decisions on carbon outcomes. It simplifies the interface so that the bar to entry is lowered to a community of users who don't have the privilege of the space syntax education that many of us have had. It allows non-expert people to interact with the concerns around spatial layout design, spatial connectivity, and land use planning. The sixth area of technology development is Line, an active mobility platform that is web-based, like the Zero Navigator. It has built into it pre-processed analysis of spatial layout, land use pattern, and highways characteristics, and it allows planning officers to instantly generate proposals for cycle networks, among other things. This is important because a lot of interest now exists in the creation of active mobility networks, but the tools to make them happen are pretty thin on the ground. What we've done is to shortcut the creation of cycle network proposals by pre-processing and preloading a model of Great Britain. And this, of course, is about making changes happen faster and at lower cost for the benefit of the built and natural environments. A seventh area of technology development is a platform called Flow. Flow is very close to my heart. It's been a desire for many years to create a platform which responds instantly to the sketch inputs of designers and processes immediately those sketches in order to provide real-time feedback to the designer on the spatial implications of their design decisions. Flow is designed to work with a tablet and a stylus, and its algorithm understands the nature of the sketch, simplifies it to a line graph, processes that line graph, and provides immediate feedback. Flow has been developed in partnership with Chinese investors, and we're in the process of developing it to a commercial application. So look out for Flow. Finally, Syntaxiu. Syntaxiu is another platform aimed to simplify the space syntax process. It's perhaps best considered as a predecessor to Flow. It's likely to become available in the next 12 to 18 months. The prototypes for it have already existed now for some time. And Syntaxiu simplifies the user interface that those of you who are familiar with depth map will know can become very complicated, can give you a lot of choice. The depth map user interface is very useful if you're very confident with space syntax. But if you're new to the subject, and a big part of our mission is to disseminate space syntax into practice, again to lower the bar for entry so that non-educated users can instantly pick up on it. Syntaxiu in many ways goes back to where we were with Axman in the 1980s, which was a very simple tool that almost anybody could use almost immediately. It's with tools like this that simplify the interface, but don't necessarily simplify the analysis, that I believe we can take very important steps in normalizing the use of space syntax within planning and architectural design practice. And this normalization is very important. The last remark I want to make is about the nature of space syntax itself. We have responsibility for an incredible body of work. Together, we are developing, pioneering an important contribution to science, and equally an important contribution to research and to practice. It's important that we don't just hold on to it ourselves. It's important that we share it and that we make it available. And that's why our development route is very much geared around two themes. First, ever more capable and sophisticated analysis to meet the demands of the day. Second, the simplification of the user interface. I trust that these remarks have been enlightening and are helpful, and above all, I hope provocative to your conversations today and going forward into the future. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. I look forward to the next opportunity of not just speaking to you, but being with you. Thank you.